President-elect Donald Trump may be closer to naming his Secretary of State, and the frontrunner comes from the world of big oil. Yesterday, Mr. Trump tweeted, "Whether I choose him or not for state, Rex Tillerson, the chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil, is a world-class player and dealmaker. Stay tuned." But as enthusiastic as Mr. Trump is about the Exxon CEO, some senators are already expressing reservations because of Tillerson's close ties to Russia's president, Vladimir Putin.
Vladimir Putin is a thug, a bully, and a murderer, and anybody else who describes him as anything else is lying. So we cannot have an accommodation with the Russians until they understand what Ronald Reagan taught them, and that is peace through strength. And right now we have no peace and we have no strength. So it depends. I don't know what Mr. Tillerson's relationship with Vladimir Putin was, but I'll tell you, it is a matter of concern to me.
Joining us now to discuss the geopolitical circumstances surrounding a potential Tillerson appointment for Secretary of State is Edward Djerejian. He's Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy Director. He has served as the U.S. ambassador to Israel and Syria and is the former Occidental Petroleum chairman. Edward, thank you so much for joining us. What do you having an energy industry background yourself, presumably you don't think that would disqualify Rex Tillerson from such a role. What would he bring to it from having had this corporate experience?
Well, in my experience, CEOs of major energy companies necessarily have great international experience because of the multinational character of these corporations. Especially ExxonMobil is the largest and has operations, I think, in at least 50 countries in the world. And Rex Tillerson, as CEO and chairman of ExxonMobil, has the great responsibility in that position of negotiating with foreign entities, leaders of the world, and basically has to know a lot about what's going on in that country before a corporation like ExxonMobil makes investment decisions. So I think the qualifications on the international scene are really more positive than any negatives.
You know the situation on the corporate side from your work at Occidental Petroleum. You know the situation on the State Department side as well. This is a Byzantine network, a Byzantine hierarchy in Washington and around the world. Is it at all worrisome to you that the person heading that organization would not have any basic familiarity with how the State Department works?
Well, that's always an issue when you have someone who doesn't have the political experience or has not worked in government. When they come into a top managerial position, as you mentioned it, the bureaucracy can be quite Byzantine. But again, when you have someone who's a good executive and has good leadership skills, he or she can sometimes see through that when they take over the bureaucracy and adjust it to their own requirements. Let's not forget George Shultz, who came from Bechtel. It's true that he was Secretary of Labor also, but George Shultz brought that type of expertise and management skills into the job.
Turning to the issue of Russia directly, what is the proper positioning with regard to that country at this point?
Well, look, we have a very difficult, contentious relationship with Russia. It has deteriorated in recent years. It's one of the most critical issues on the international scene. In my personal view, the new administration, the Trump administration, has to take a very hard look at the U.S.-Russian relationship. It is a relationship that matters. It impacts on U.S. national security interests in a major way. Let's not forget that Russia straddles Europe, the Middle East, all the way to China. There are many issues that we need to come to certain common understandings, if we can, with Russia. So I think this is an opportunity to re-engage in a strategic dialogue, and I don't mean a phony dialogue just for the sake of procedure and theatrics, but a real substantive dialogue. Where are the issues that we differ on? Is there any potential of really resolving those issues, such as in Syria and Ukraine? And what are the common interests, such as the common interests we have in defeating Islamic radical jihadist groups such as ISIS? So this is an opportunity, and I don't think we should see it as a problematic initial approach, but one that can provide a moment for us to restructure this relationship.
You know, since his name was floated, since Rex Tillerson's name was floated, it seems like a lot of reporting on and interest in has been on his relationship with Russia, his experience in Russia, and perhaps that tells us something about this incoming administration's priorities when it comes to foreign policy. But do you worry at all about the fact that there are other countries we're dealing with at this point and have tricky relationships with at this point? I think of countries in the Middle East. I think about China as well. Are you convinced that Rex Tillerson could engage with those countries as ably as he would be able to deal with Russia?
Well, he has extensive experience in the Middle East and dealing with Arab countries in the Gulf, countries like Qatar and others. So I think he has that knowledge base. I do not know how extensive his knowledge of China is, or if ExxonMobil has had any dealings with China. But again, if he comes to the State Department, he will have a vast array of expertise that if he listens to that expertise and gains the knowledge, I think it's really the leadership skills that are really important. But let me make one point on this Secretary of State appointment. One thing that a lot of the commentary is missing is that what is essential, no matter who it is, no matter who the President-elect Trump chooses, it's that personal, professional relationship between the President and the Secretary of State that is critical. If that relationship is there, for example, as existed between President Bush 41 and Secretary of State Jim Baker, they were a powerful team because nobody could get in between those two men on foreign policy. When Baker spoke, everyone knew he was speaking for the President of the United States. That's an essential element of the choice of Secretary of State. She must have the full confidence of the President and has to be part of the inner team.
Thank you so much. Really interesting perspective there on that relationship between the Secretary of State and President. Edward Djerejian is Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy Director. He's also a former U.S. ambassador to Syria and Israel. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.